On your monitor, Mary?
It was there, and just decided to adios. Oh, now it's back. Looks like we can start. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, February 28th, 2019 meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Roll call, please. Ms. Allison.
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton. Commissioner Brindle. Here. Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this morning, and is there anyone that wishes to modify the agenda? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as shown.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion second to adopt the meeting agenda as shown. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Community comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the HRA on a matter of concern to them this morning? Good morning.
Good morning. Arnie Bigby, 7621 Edinburgh Way in Edina. It's great to be here this morning. A beautiful sunrise, and it makes people start thinking about gardens and planting seeds. So I'm going to plant a few seeds here this morning, but they're not the kind for gardening. I just am so impressed with the work that's been done by the City Council and the HRA in the past year. It's just great progress for the city. And rather than have it come to be seen as work, I think we can phrase this in a little bit different area. I was able to attend the AARP 6th Annual Conference on Livable Communities last November in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what I've learned there is that the livable communities really are places that we can plan for in the future, and they're going to be really fun, good places for everybody to live, whether you're 5 years old or 65 years old, or outside of that range also. So AARP, along with other organizations, has established 60 criteria in 7 different categories to measure livability in different communities. And it's a great way for communities to get a handle on these qualities, these features that make places really livable and attractive. There are currently 4 cities in the state of Minnesota that have met that designation: Alexandria, Maple Grove, Northfield, and Minneapolis. So I think it's at least another item for the HRA and the City Council to be aware of, and hopefully we can use some of those things to guide us in the future. So I'll stop my gardening there. The seeds are planted.
Right. Good. Mr. Bigby, do you have those 60 different criteria that you could submit to the clerk or send in?
I have the books that AARP has published. There are 6 that range from housing, transit, economic development. They're readily available on their website. They're available at no charge. Yeah. And I'd be happy to get that information to the city clerk so that can be entered. I think it's a little voluminous to.
Yeah, that would be a leg up on looking at those criteria. Thank you.
Very good. Yep.
Is there anyone else that wishes to address the HRA on a matter of concern to them? All right, seeing no one coming forward, we'll move on to the consent agenda. There's only one item on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda, which embodies the regular meeting minutes from February 14, 2019?
So second.
We got a motion second to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then on to items that are not on consent. We've got the reports and recommendations portion of the HRA meeting in front of us, and we have a real interesting discussion about to occur with respect to a potential support by the HRA for the preservation of naturally occurring housing at 7008 Sandell Avenue in Edina. Mr. Neuendorf, welcome.
Yes, good morning. Bill Neuendorf, the city's economic development manager. For the last couple of weeks, Stephanie Hawkinson and myself, Stephanie is the city's affordable housing development manager. have been working on a proposal that we'll get to you this morning. Ms. Hawkinson is unable to join us this morning. She's out on college visits today. So I'll be doing the presentation. We're also joined this morning by Blake Hopkins. He's with Aon Housing. But this proposal is regarding the preservation of an existing apartment building in Edina. And it's located at 7008 Sandell Avenue. Sandell is a shorter street. It's just west of France Avenue, behind the Room and Board, just south of 70th Street. And as won't belabor the group with a background, but for many, many years we've talked about affordable housing, we've talked about goals, we've talked about strategies to get there. We've made some progress in building new units, both separate buildings and units included in new construction. But this morning we wanted to focus on preservation of existing. And I wanted to put one slide up here just to remind us of the context. For the last several years, we've heard in the news about many existing apartment buildings that are just naturally occurring affordable, just through the way that they've been built and managed and owned. They provide affordable housing for some residents that have been there for years and decades. Many of those properties, not just in Edina, but in the Twin Cities, are turning over. And usually when that happens, the new owners have a strategy to reposition it, fix it up, increase the rents, and that has a severe detrimental impact to the folks that have lived there for many, many years. In Edina, this article is back from almost 2 years ago now, the Interlaken Court Apartments, where that long time owner sold. New person bought it, fixed it up, but rents went up dramatically. And this is not unique to that property, nor is it unique to Edina. So last fall, the HRA adopted a three-part strategy to address the affordable housing need in Edina. First off is to produce new units. Secondly is to protect those existing residents that suffer some of the potential consequences of the loss of their homes. And the third strategy is to preserve those existing units where possible. We did some digging, and we found that there's nearly 100 apartment buildings in Edina today. 29 of those buildings have some units that are considered affordably priced. And so that equates to about 5,400 total apartments in Edina today. And less than 1,000 of those, only 18%, are considered affordable. So as some of those properties are threatened with a sale and a conversion, that number plummets, and that's something that we're definitely concerned with. So that's the background that gets us to our recommendation and our proposal this morning. The Aon Company is under contract to purchase a 16-property portfolio. 15 of those buildings are located in the city of Minneapolis. One of them is located in Edina. A long-time ownership group, they're selling the portfolio, so it goes as a package. The property in Edina I mentioned is on Sandell. It's a smaller property. It's 2 stories with some garden-level units, built in the early 1960s on about half an acre of land. There's 11 apartments in the building, all 2-bedroom units. There's detached, enclosed parking on the site, a nice yard, front yard, nice backyard, etc. The preservation plan that Aon has in mind is to purchase the property, the portfolio of properties from the owners, perform some moderate rehabilitation to keep them in good condition, and then lock them in as affordable. Aon's company mission is affordability forever, but when it comes down to the paperwork, they're looking at locking it in for a 30-year term. That's the term of their mortgage. They are willing to make sure that they reduce their rents on at least 40% of the units to be affordable at that 60% median income level. The remainder of the units would be affordable at the 80% income level. Special attention would be paid to make sure that none of those existing tenants are displaced. So as the tenants turn over, that's when they would make some rental adjustments to make sure that the 5 units are satisfying our 60% affordability level. We've worked with Aon quite rapidly over the last couple of weeks. This is a transaction where the owner needs to or wants to sell the properties, they will be available on the market. Aon feels that they're in a great first position to get the properties before they go on the general market to the highest bidder. And they have already done a lot of work with the city of Minneapolis, who's pledged $4.5 million to help address the purchase of those properties in Minneapolis. The request to Edina is much different since there's only one building here. Staff recommends that we continue to work with Aon to preserve this existing property and these existing affordable units. And that we do that by providing a grant of $350,000 that allows those ongoing affordable rents to continue for at least 30 years. The source of the grant funds would come from the Southdale 2 TIF district. We've talked a lot over the years about using some of those existing incremental property taxes that are created from the mall and some of the new luxury housing to fund affordable properties. We have the legislative authority to do that, so this is a pretty simple request. We would make sure that there's a restrictive covenant on the property that binds them to that minimum term of 30 years. We'd also retain a right to consider, just as we've done for other projects, an extension at year 30. One other thing that Aon is willing to work with us on is to provide some type of public easement along the front edge of the property on Sandell. We recently approved the Greater Southdale District Plan, and Sandell is shown to be the future site of a bike path, trail, some type of north-south roadway. We're not sure what that's going to look like yet. It's a future plan, but in this case, they're willing to grant us an easement on the front edge of their property that would give us future flexibility to build that trail in the future. Our recommendation then this morning is to seek your authority to work with legal counsel, Dorsey and Whitney, to prepare the documents, both the grant document and the restrictive covenant and the easements, and to use Southdale monies to fund that work as well. I'd mentioned that Blake Hopkins is here with us. Both he and myself are available for any questions. The last point I wanted to mention is that time is of the essence here. They are under contract. There is a relatively short window of time before the owner would look for other buyers. So they're looking to close in May. So that gives us a reasonable amount of time to get the work done. But we're looking for your authority to continue on this effort this morning.
All right, good. Questions by any commissioners? Commissioner Brindle.
Thank you. So what is the purchase price on the property? Was it 1.8 million?
So the entire portfolio is for sale, so they haven't broken out individual properties. And the total portfolio price is $28 million for 16 properties.
Oh, the assessed value on this is 1.8.
Correct.
I see. So if we look at that as possibly this property's share of the mortgage, then $350,000 is about 5%. So we would be partnering at the level of 5% in this?
It's in that range. Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's the first time we've done anything like this. Looking at how we partner, it's hard to put it in the dollars and cents since we usually put it in the units and make sure that we have the ability to accommodate people. And so I guess, where did you come up with $350,000? Is it enough to maintain affordability? Are we putting enough into this?
That's a great question. I would ask Mr. Hopkins to address that, but we've had a lot of conversations to make sure that we get the number right. I won't explain Mr. Hopkins' math, but he is happy to do so.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Blake Hopkins. I'm the Vice President of Housing Development at Aon. So this acquisition is a little different than our traditional work at Aon. So we both do new construction and acquisition preservation work. Sometimes with the new construction, it's a little easier in terms of explaining what that gap is. We're trying to solve for a gap. It costs X to build the apartment complex. We're going to get a first mortgage and low-income housing tax credits. but there will still be a remaining gap to get that affordability, and that's what we typically come to our public partners requesting. In this case, what we're trying to solve for is essentially a return to an equity investor, and these are impact investors. They're not expecting double-digit returns, but they are looking for a specified return, whether it be 5.5%, 6.5%. That's their expectation. And so we still go out and get a first mortgage. It's through Freddie Mac. It's with a very competitive rate. We size that based on the in-place rents that are there today. But after we get that first mortgage, there is always a gap between the first mortgage and what the seller's purchase price is. That purchase price in this market today is typically based not on the existing net operating income, that's revenue minus expenses. It's based on a projected NOI based on increased rents, because investors in this market, value-add investors, are saying we can come in, do some cosmetic upgrades, increase rents by $200, $300 in some markets, and achieve a higher NOI. And so what we're trying to do is pay a competitive rate for that property, because otherwise they would go to the market, but also keep those rents stabilized. And really the only way we can do that is through a few tools that we have that other market rate buyers don't have. One is the 4D property tax classification. So every unit that we commit to keeping under 60% AMI, we receive a property tax reduction on, similar to our tax credit properties. We also have lower cost debt, typically through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And our equity investors who are expecting a 5.6% return or 6% return, that's half of what an equity investor might be expecting from a market rate transaction. So between those tools, we try to level the playing field as much as possible. In some cases such as this, there is additional request, and that's where the subsidy comes in. So the $350,000 was determined essentially by looking at, in this case, saying, what's the lowest equity pricing we think that's out there in the market? It's about 5.6%. And saying, if we purchase the property today, it's at about 72% AMI is where the average rents are on the 11 properties in Edina. If we had no public subsidy from Minneapolis or Edina, our return to our investors would be about 2.5% to pay the $28 million asking price and keep the rents stabilized, which tells us we can't do the transaction. We'd have to pay them about $25 million, and the sellers would say, thanks, but no thanks. So, or closer to $24 million. By working with Minneapolis, we start plugging in those numbers, we can reduce the purchase price down essentially by $4.5 million. Now we're getting closer in the range. We looked at Edina as well and said, what if we looked at a pro rata amount? So Minneapolis putting that 4.5 in, it's about $21,000 a door. We plug that into the Edina numbers, that helped get us pretty close to where we wanted to go. In conversations with staff, they said, all right, well, the property's 72% AMI, what if we bought down 5 of those units, more than 40%, below 60%? So in this case, it's almost like thinking the train has left the station. Our goal is to slow the train down, right, in terms of the rent increases. Now we're going to stop the train and move it backwards. We had to run the math and say, if we're going to reduce the revenue on those 5 units over those 30 years that we're going to restrict them, what's the loss to the return to the investor? And that's how the math came out to $350,000. So it's essentially saying, if the market rents on these properties after the conversion are sold at $1,595 in the market, which is what the seller shows as their kind of market rents, and we're going to take 5 of those units down to $1,200 a month. The $395 a month times 5 units times 12 months times 30 years adds up to a pretty big number, and you can kind of discount that by a 5% discount rate. It comes to about that $350. So with no acquisition, there's a little more of a sort of a trial and error looking at the numbers, as opposed to just it costs $20 million to build and we can raise 18, so we need $2 million kind of thing. So I don't know if that was more confusing or less good or helpful.
No, I wanted the explanation and appreciate it, and
Yep.
it makes sense. What's the condition of the building?
This building out of the 16 is in really good shape, actually. And so they've actually already done about $8,500 per unit of interior improvements at this property. So there's different stages, essentially, of NOAA acquisition. This, in my mind, would be a property that was kind of getting ready to flip in a way and being sold into the market at that price, where some get sold in very deteriorated condition and the buyer comes in and will do the improvements and then achieve those rents. I think in this case, at least for the Edina property, they've come through and done about $8,500 worth of improvements to the interiors. Our review will be looking at sort of the bigger picture items, systems, which HVAC systems, windows,
Right.
roofs, And we have not done our property needs assessment. We'll go through with the third party and do that assessment. But that's sort of our first blush is the interiors, new kitchens, baths look great, but what's kind of underneath the skin is our what we'll be looking at.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Member Fisher, Commissioner Fisher.
So the explanation was really helpful. I think it's sometimes nice for us to understand what the process, the thinking was as you work as a team. So just to get clarification, there is a plan to invest in things like windows and roof, and to me that's an advantage here. And I think what I'm trying to gather and figure out is this would be the first time we get involved in something like this. So, we have to think about what's the precedent we might be setting. How are we not being potentially unfair to somebody else that might come along and say, we've got a project over here. I think one of the this is obviously a good opportunity for us, and for me, knowing that there's going to be investment in the building, so a building that's been here for a while will be refreshened and be even a bigger enhancement to the neighborhood, and hopefully we can achieve some of these goals. I think those are all advantages. My line of thinking today is to try and figure out how we can do something potentially for the first time and not set ourselves up to be in a bad position later if we get a whole bunch of other opportunities. That we just have to have a system for how do we determine what's a good opportunity and what maybe is something that could be just left to, that whole naturally occurring affordable housing. How do you let some of it keep being naturally occurring? So that was a very rambly way of saying I'm not sure what I said. So anyway, but the explanation was good. Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. Just as a matter of curiosity, what's your LTV on this building?
The loan to value will be, the max that the loan allows is 80%, but we'll be closer probably, we'll be at 18, so about 77%.
77.
Yep.
And so you seek investors for the 23 points, for the 23%.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
those investors are looking for 6.5.
Exactly, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so we always try to max out the first mortgage because it's the cheapest money essentially. So our blended first mortgage rate will probably be in the low 4s right now, which is really competitive.
Yeah.
Minneapolis will actually participate in the loan and sort of guarantee it essentially, which buys it down by 40 basis points, 0.4%. So we always try to max out the debt first, and then whatever that gap is, we go raise equity. And so there's really only a handful of these equity providers nationally. One is actually locally here in Minnesota, the Twin Cities. Greater Minnesota Housing Fund has a NOAA Impact Fund that we've worked with in the past. And so they're kind of on the forefront of doing this work.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Just also, thanks for bringing this forward. I do understand it's the first time, but when you look at the nature of the project and you say, all right, we just will gain 11 units of affordable housing. Under our current policy, we'd be building 55 units to get that 11. So this is an enormous step forward, and I think at much less expense in terms of public funding. So I view this as a win-win, and it's a huge step in preservation. So thanks for bringing that forward, and thanks for doing such a good job in your presentation. It's very clear that this is in our best interest, to me in any event, very clear that it's in our best interest. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, if I may, thank you for that. One of the things we do like about the NOAA preservation is the cost benefit. It takes up to $300,000 plus to build new construction in 3 years, as we've seen in some cases. This is 90 days, and we can close on 220 throughout the metro. All in cost, including upwards of $2 million of capital improvements in these projects. You're still at only about 140 unit in terms of preservation. So half the price essentially of the cost to build new. So we see it as vitally important at Aon.
Commissioner Fisher.
Can I ask one more time? I think I missed a little bit of your explanation. So you have a pool of investors that are out there that are saying, I'm happy to take half of the return that I could if I invested over here.
Yep.
Why would there be a pool of people that are willing to do
Yeah.
that? And what's in it for them, other than
Yeah.
just being really good
So for
people?
us, yeah, and it's, we wish there was a larger pool, and that might be why there's a very limited pool nationally. Really only 4 or 5 nationally that do this. They're called impact investors. They see themselves as having a double bottom line. They do need to get their return, but they also want that investment to go towards some common good. They typically receive their money from various sources. Some are foundations, so locally, Greater Minnesota Housing Fund raised their funding from foundations in cities. So think of it as a foundation saying, we only need 2 or 3% return on this money. And then they can go out and invest that money. They take a spread to cover their overhead and costs, but it still only gets to 6.5%. So it's foundations it's pools that are going out and raising money from foundations. Some of the larger national ones, Enterprise does this work. They're a national organization. There's a group out of New York called Community Development Trust. I think they do also raise their funding. They'll do $80 million funds at a time, and it does come from sometimes larger banks also who have some funds set aside for these lower returns. So they're also investing in higher return developments and acquisitions, but they also set aside some for these sort of foundation returns. So it is a limited pool, maybe 4 or 5 different throughout the entire country that are doing this below 10% return, but there are folks out there doing the work.
Thank you.
A couple of thoughts. I thought some good points made up here on the dais. With respect to the potential investment, and from my calculations, it looks like we'd be investing about $16,666.66 per door with that $350 divided by 11. And I'm thinking to Commissioner Anderson's point about this is a really good deal. When we helped you with the new building, I remember Commissioner Staunton talking about we got $100,000 a door on somebody who wanted to opt into the program, and we were able to turn around and pivot and give it to you for $35,000 a door. Mm-hmm. So this is a substantially better way to use our money than the new investments, although they're both really great ways to do it. So as we think about kind of principles or standards or guidelines that we might want to use, I tend to favor the guidelines because I think a lot of these projects will be really nuanced, and based on your experience over the years in the real estate business, I'm sure you'd probably concur that you got to look at each deal on its own merits and decide. But maybe somewhere along the line we can get some guidance on what's the range per door that we want to invest in naturally occurring, and think about that. A couple of questions on you'd mentioned that the rents is presently average, or maybe Mr. Neuendorf mentioned this. Rents presently average about 72% of AMI, and I take it that was in the Sandell building, not all the buildings.
Correct. That's just in the Sandell building. So out of the full 220 units, about 120 of them are below 60% AMI, between 40, I think it might be 48 and 60% AMI, 120 of them. 100 are between 60 and 72. So these are actually on the highest end of the spectrum for all 220 units. And so for Aon, our goal is obviously always everything below 60%. But we saw in this case, the benefit of preserving those 120 units below 60 and then also stabilizing the rents that are up to 72 was worth pursuing the project for us because we look at it also 120 units below, in this case now 125 because we're adding 5 here in Edina, 125 units below 60% in a good area of Minneapolis and Edina. That would take us a couple years, obviously, to develop that many units, new construction. So it made sense to pursue.
So in the Edina project, if we approve this and you go forward and close, will some of the folks in Edina see improvements in their property, but actually a rent reduction, and then some a slight increase because you'll have 5 at 60 of AMI, 60% of AMI, and 6 at 80% of AMI?
So the way that we're looking at doing it is phasing it in. So anyone who's there today, we wouldn't necessarily select randomly 5 households out of the 11 who are there to get a rent reduction. And we wouldn't, displace them either so that they would meet the restrictive covenant. We would say once the unit turns over naturally, we'll rent it into the market at 60% AMI. Whoever moves in has to be income qualified, just like we would for tax credit property, that their income and then rent is below 60. So as the units turn, we'd phase them in. So that way we wouldn't be either displacing someone on one end, saying you don't meet the qualifications, or selecting out of the group five households.
Okay, good. Do we know much about the tenant mix there now?
You know, we've been negotiating the purchase agreement for the last 3-4 weeks, and we just signed it yesterday. Literally yesterday, we're in contract. So we haven't gotten the full amount of due diligence yet. We had enough due diligence to kind of do our initial analysis, but now we can do the physical inspections and go into the property. So we don't know, necessarily who the households are at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know when I read these materials, I got quite enthusiastic, quite excited about it, because to Commissioner Anderson's point, we're making a really good investment here, I think, potentially. And so that's the financial side of it, but there's also the human side of it, because all of us remember this event that occurred a couple of years ago, very near here to City Hall, and I think that's a painful sort of thing that lingers with all of us, that we just don't want to see that happen again, to the extent we can play a role in making sure that it doesn't happen again. So this is a great opportunity to deal with the human side of things too, as well as the financial side. So there's a lot to like about this. Other questions from commissioners that prompt any further inquiry? And so, Commissioner Brindle.
Yeah, just a thank you. Just a comment that in the Housing Task Force report done by the state of Minnesota and put out by Governor Dayton in August of 2018, the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing is huge in that report. And it's certainly the sustainable thing to do, where you don't have to tear something down and build something. It's a less expensive thing to do, and it's certainly less disruptive to a neighborhood and to the people who are living, in this case, in that apartment building. So this puts us, I think, step one into taking action to make something real. We do have an affordable housing policy. It does, and while its goal is to get affordable housing units, it also gives developers the opportunity to participate in affordable housing if they choose not to build affordable in their development. This project is an example of how those total buy-in dollars are used then to allow the city, because this doesn't come out of the general fund, this comes out of affordable housing dollars. And so it allows the city to partner with a developer for the betterment of our community as a whole in maintaining affordable housing. So thank you, as Member Anderson said, thank you for bringing this forward. It's an honor to be able to participate and make this a reality.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fisher.
I just wanted to add one sort of add-on to what the others have said. You know, I think about, we work on policy, and you can write policy all day long and it can mean nothing. And I look out here and I see partners, in the development community, our staff, and the folks sitting out here, our group that's advocating for this, and you all represent the action part of this. And so thank you, because again, the policy won't get us any affordable housing. It's the action, and thanks for that.
Member Brindle raised a good point, I thought, and that was the source of funds. Is the source of funds the buy-in monies that we've been seeing coming in, or is it the Southdale TIF District Fund, or is it the combination of things?
Yeah, a great question. So for this proposal, staff is recommending that we use existing Southdale 2 monies. We can pool them from that district right across the street into this property. That would allow us to use the buy-in funds for other projects in the future. The reason we made that decision, or that recommendation, was that those TIF funds can only be used for projects like this, whereas the affordable housing, the buy-in funds are flexible. We could do any number of creative things with them. So we thought, let's save those flexible dollars for other creative projects that we might not have dreamed up today. And let's use these funds to fund or to provide financial support for exactly the purpose that we collected those monies.
Good, okay. All right, Mr. Neuendorf and Ms. Hawkinson, the proposal is that we have a motion to approve the term sheet that we didn't walk through, but I think in your presentation you walked through the key elements of the
That's correct.
terms and conditions of the term sheet. So we'd have a motion approving the term sheet and authorize staff to engage third-party advisors at HRA expense to prepare a full legal agreement to provide grant funding for the preservation of affordable housing at 7008 Sandell Avenue. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We got a motion second on the motion as stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, terrific. And then, any correspondence that we need to be aware of, Ms. Ellison? Okay. And then project updates. First, we're going to hear from Executive Director Neal on a project update on things going on around the city.
Yes.
Which I kind of got worn out yesterday giving the state of the community. We had so much to talk about. I should have forewarned people that we were going to
And actually, Mr. Chair,
talk for a while.
In terms of just the project development, or excuse me, the project update for the HRA, there is no action required by the HRA on either one of these last two actions. So if there are questions, either Mr. Neuendorf or I can answer questions from the council, but we didn't have a presentation on either one of these last two items. We just wanted to get it in front of you to make sure you had a chance to see it, and if there were any questions, we wanted an opportunity to answer them for you in a public setting if we needed to.
All right, good. With respect to the project description list and the status, anybody have any questions? Any commissioner have a question or comment? Commissioner Fisher?
Well, my comment would be I sometimes worry that Bill doesn't have enough to do, and this is helpful to see that he's keeping busy in
Thanks.
some way.
Yeah.
So,
We'll keep on that.
thank you.
Yeah.
I have been a little bit curious about 4500 France. It looks like some things have been done over there. I've had some resident comment that nothing's happening over there, but apparently some things are happening. You got some environmental remediation going on. And
Yep, that's correct. So the developer started the environmental remediation back in late November and finished it right around the holidays. And so a lot of that work, all the asbestos removal and lead and whatnot, that occurred inside the building. So neighbors would have seen a couple large box trucks and some crews going in and out with the protective garb. So there was a lot of lead paint, a lot of asbestos, particularly in the commercial buildings. So that's out. They also found 2 private water wells from turn of the century that were in the backyard. So those had to be capped and taken care of. So that work is done, which allows them to prepare for the site demolition, scheduled for March or April, depending on the weather. As soon as the snow piles get smaller, they'll be out there with the demolition crews and getting the sites cleaned up.
good.
Couple of weeks ago, Mr. Neuendorf and Mr. Milliner and I updated Councilmember Palmisano and Robin Hutchinson, who's the Public Works Director from Minneapolis. We met at the Caribou there and kind of shared what's going to happen on our side of the street. We saw what's going to happen on their side of the street. There was really a remarkable amount of consistency between our future plans there, and so we were glad to see that, and they were happy that we had the opportunity to share what's going to happen there, because they're getting a lot of questions about it on their side too.
All right, good. Yeah, thanks for doing that. How about down on Market Street on the Nolan Mains project? Do they continue to be on time, on budget? To the best of your knowledge?
Yep. So the Nolan Mains, they are on time, on schedule. So there's 2 buildings on the private side, the Nolan Mains apartments. So the first building is topped out, so they're at the full 6 stories with all the concrete. So that piece is done. That was the larger one, the more difficult one to install. They are now on level 2 or 2.5 of the second building, which is closest to Spillane Montage. So they're on schedule for that. They did build, just like our school district, they build a couple snow days into their schedule, and they've used several of those snow days. It's not the snow that impacts the construction so much, it's that extreme and intense cold that you just can't pour concrete when it gets to be that cold. But despite that, they are still on track. Whether they're on budget, I have not asked them about that. I hope they are, but that's for their contractor to worry about. But so far, we're still on track to keep that rolling. That first building, they now have the wall panels on the first 4 levels. So it's starting to take shape, and slowly it'll start to look like a building as they get the cladding on and more of the windows in. So if you stop by every couple weeks, it looks like a whole new project as it evolves.
All right. And are you, from a staff standpoint, thinking about the former Edina Public Works site, that in terms of the staff recommendation of what we think should happen over there? Because that's something we don't want to let drift too long, I don't think.
Right. That's when we had the work session back in January and had some discussion here with the group. So staff is working on that discussion. I think we probably need a little bit more discussion. I don't know if there was a clear consensus or direction that seemed to be the emerging preference from the group. So we've been debriefing amongst ourselves to try to understand what you were saying in that conversation, and I think we might need a little bit more direction on that.
We're coming back to you.
Yeah, I think that's
later this
good way to
spring.
approach it. I think there were mixed messages in there.
I don't understand. I thought we were clear as can be.
Well, individually,
That's how I
you might have
recalled
been.
it.
That's how you
Yeah.
recall it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go back and check the tape again.
We were all
Okay.
clear in our own very interesting directions,
Right.
but
Our fault. We'll go back and look.
I think that's really good feedback
Yeah.
for us, because maybe we need to take a step back and try, instead of stating our individual opinions, see where we meet, because it's impossible for you to have a direction if you've got 5 people with 5 different opinions. So that's good feedback for
Well,
us.
frankly, I think it's the same situation on the staff side too. I think we have perhaps a lack of consensus on how to advise you as well. So
okay.
that's we need to come together too, and
Okay.
we can help you come together, I think, as well.
Okay.
Commissioner Brindle, you had your light on.
Yeah. So the library site at 7001 York Avenue South, I did visit with Commissioner Callison recently, and she did tell me that they are working with Simon Properties on the south side, looking at a possible library site on the south side of Southdale. Is that the focus right now, or are they still looking at the library site as a possible place as well?
Boy, I don't have any direct insight into that. The
Nor do
last
I.
I heard, they were still evaluating both options.
Okay.
I did meet with Simon representatives recently, and there's still interest on their side. But I think they're still in that dance of what the
Okay.
numbers look like and what the timing looks like.
Right.
But to my recollection, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought the county board wanted to make a site decision this year. I'm sorry, this summer.
Yeah, what Commissioner Callison told me was that they would have a recommendation. They want to come public with a recommendation in the summer of 2019. So I was just wondering if there's an obvious direction. There are other Simon malls that that are connected to a public library. So it just seems like, from a plant point of view, it might make some sense as well, but it's not my decision. I'm excited to hear what they have to say when they say it.
What we have heard more recently is just what Mr. Neuendorf commented, that they wanted to make a site decision this summer, so in the summer of 2019, and I believe have something completed by the end of 23. Maybe it was 22. but somewhere in that time frame. But we haven't been more recently involved in a dialogue about site selection. So they have been looking at site selection, I think, more from an economic standpoint, economic development standpoint. So that has been kept relatively tight, I think, and their discussions have been as they negotiate potential options either at the mall or even at their own site.
Finally, for me, with respect to the special legislation we have over at the House and the Senate with respect to extending the life of the TIF district, the Southdale 2 TIF district, any status report on that?
Yes. We have a meeting next week that involves you and Paul, Senator Marquardt?
Representative Marquardt.
Representative Marquardt on Tuesday. But Monday night, we have a hearing that I'm going to testify at, and Katie Sen's going to testify at, House Tax Committee hearing Monday night sometime after 6, probably light. That'll be our first hearing to try to get into the House tax bill.
All right, so...
And if I could just, I'm sorry, just to clarify one thing. So the city's request in this is not to extend the TIF district life. Some cities do ask for that. In this case, we feel that's too big of an ask. But what we're asking for is additional flexibility to spend more of those monies that we've already collected within that district. So the Southdale 2 district will expire in 2021. We're not asking to extend that. We're just asking for greater flexibility to spend those incremental dollars that have been collected there.
And also, Bill, that to not need to create a new district every time? Is that a pooling modification as well, right?
Correct. Right. So we're asking that if the monies are invested in affordable housing, whether it's creation of new units or, as we did this morning, preserve existing units, we could just pool those monies directly into the projects, and affordable housing would be considered an in-district eligible expense. The benefit of that is that we don't have to incur the cost to hire legal and financial representatives to create a new TIF district every time. We still have to go through the process. We still have the meetings and the public meetings, et cetera. But it can cost $30,000 to $60,000 in professional fees every time you create a TIF district. Normally, we have developers pick that up when we've done TIF districts in the past. But for affordable projects, that's just an extra $60,000 of paperwork that, if we use the math this morning, that's 2 units of preservation. And so we're hoping that we can streamline the process to not have to spend those types of monies.
All right.
Can I ask you a follow-up?
Commissioner Fisher.
So, Bill, I agree with the strategy, but my only concern is, do you feel like it's reasonable for us, assuming we get this approved, between now and 2021, where we're not like frantically out trying to spend that money? Is that a reasonable period of time to get projects done and to get, at least to allocate the money?
Yes, I do. So right now, the current legislation says we have to do it all by December of 2019. Somewhere in that sentence, I didn't use the word frantic, but you might read it in between some of the words. So if we can have a couple years to do this good work, I think we can avoid that, avoid some troubles, right? I mean, when you try to do 3 years of work in 9 months, you end up making mistakes, or you overpay, or you make some decisions that cost more money just to make sure you're not making a mistake later. If we can get a reasonable period of time to allocate these funds, I think that's achievable. So if they give us the ability to do these projects until 2021, I think that's plenty of time. I think the Sandell project this morning is a great example. 4 weeks ago, that project did not even exist. It wasn't even on our radar. So in the past, we've been asked, well, where are these sites? Where are the NOAA properties? Where should we be focused? So we've identified where all the existing buildings are. We've identified when they've been built, and we can go to the tax records and find out who owns them. But if we have a couple years to do it, I think just like Aon did this morning, they can keep their eyes open and start making some smart phone calls and find which properties might be for sale in the next couple years at a reasonable price, and start working with groups to build new units as well, if that makes sense.
I thought there was also some limitation at one point in time we were told about regarding the amount of money in the district that could be allocated to affordable housing. It seems to be a little bit different or a little nuanced portion of what you're asking for, and I don't hear that in there. So you're asking for an extension of time in which to spend the monies that are appropriate for affordable housing use. But was there another component to this, that there are monies in the TIF district that we cannot use for affordable housing that we might want to think about trying to use for affordable housing? Or what was the decision there?
Right. And that's, to your question, Chair, that's the heart of the legislation. Right now, the way that the legislation was written back in 2014, we're permitted to spend up to about half of the incremental taxes that are there. It was I'll say, arbitrary limit. They, when the legislators wrote that back in the day, they didn't want to just give the city unlimited authority to use those monies. This was untested. No one else in the state had done this before. We didn't have a single project under our belt. So, to their I think they were justified in kind of turning on the spigot slowly to make sure that we could do good projects with this. But I think we've demonstrated a few. We've got the Beacon project on 66th. We've got the Sandell project. We're working also with Aon on the 76th Street project. MWF properties on Cahill. I think they'll be coming to us sometime this year to get their funding together. So I think by the end of this year, we'll demonstrate we can fund at least 4 good projects. And so we're asking that they remove that artificial cap that they created a few years ago and allow us to tap into the full amount of funds. So that's really the heart of the legislation. We're also asking for the time extension because if they do give us the authority to do it, but require us to do it all between today and December, that's where I think we wouldn't really be able to do that well. And I think if the city is going to take this plunge and really make some progress, we want to do it well. We don't want to just do it fast. We want to do it well.
It seems to me that now this should be a story that resonates well at the legislature. I doubt there's any legislator over there from the urban area or greater Minnesota that hasn't heard people in their respective communities saying, we have a housing affordability challenge in our town. Everywhere I go to these meetings of mayors in greater Minnesota, there are so many stories about the lack of affordable housing and the lack of desire of builders to come in there and build affordable housing. So to me, this is a way for folks at the legislature to start thinking about this, not only with respect to Edina, but with respect to the rest of the state. So I think we've got a good chance at getting something done here, and hearing that we're going to meet with Representative Marquardt as well, that's encouraging because he's from greater Minnesota. So, okay, good. Commissioners, anything else? Otherwise, and any thoughts or comments you want to pass along this morning? Manager Neal, Executive Director Neal, any other? Okay, all right, good. Do you want to give our citizen volunteer group on affordable housing the information on when you're going to be testifying? They could also go over there and testify if they wanted to get signed up.
The hearing is Monday night, State Office Building, Room 5. It has a soft start at 6. Soft start because it's going to start 30 minutes after the completion of the legislative session that day. So it's 6 o'clock or later, and we're near the tail end of the agenda, which could be 8 or 10 or later. So they have to be done by midnight by rule. So that's the way the legislature works. You go and you wait your turn. And when you're Edina, you're usually at the end of the list. So you politely wait your turn.
All right. Okay. Anything else? Oh, very good. We stand adjourned. It's a record departure. HRA stands adjourned.